On a freezing winter night in Seattle, a 16-year-old boy gave away his father's prized vintage jacket to a shivering veteran. By sunrise, a Tesla Model X pulled into his driveway, and what happened next would change his family's life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain poured relentlessly over downtown Seattle, its steady rhythm punctuated by the occasional rumble of passing trains and the distant wail of sirens. Steam rose from storm drains like ghostly fingers reaching for the gray sky, while strings of holiday lights reflected off the wet pavement in blurred halos of red and green. Noah Davis pulled his father's leather jacket tighter around his shoulders, seeking comfort in its familiar warmth as much as protection from the bitter December wind. The jacket, a classic bomber style from the 1960s, was the last thing his father had left him before disappearing from their lives 3 years ago. Through the foggy storefront windows, the warm glow of closing shops cast long shadows on the wet pavement. Noah's sneakers, worn thin from too many miles, splashed through puddles as he hurried home from his after-school job at the local grocery store. In his backpack, a meager paycheck weighed heavily, barely enough to help his mother Cherry with this month's heating bill. The thought of another month of watching his mother's face crease with worry as she studied their mounting bills made his stomach twist. The Davis family's apartment, a cramped 2-bedroom unit in the rougher part of town, had been getting colder with each passing day. The ancient heating system wheezed and sputtered, struggling to keep up with the unusually harsh winter. Every morning, frost patterns decorated the inside of their windows like delicate lace, beautiful but a stark reminder of their struggling circumstances. Cherry worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide, her exhaustion evident in the dark circles under her eyes, while 8-year-old Lily had taken to sleeping in 3 layers of clothes, her small frame buried under every blanket they owned. Noah's fingers traced the smooth leather of the jacket's collar, remembering how his father used to wear it proudly. The leather was butter soft from years of wear, the stitching still immaculate despite its age. His father would spend hours telling stories about finding it in a vintage shop in San Francisco. "This jacket," he'd say, his eyes sparkling with pride, "is worth more than gold, son. They don't make them like this anymore. One day when you're old enough to appreciate its history, it'll be yours." The irony wasn't lost on Noah that his father had finally kept that one promise, though not in the way either of them had imagined. Now, it was the only valuable thing they owned, though Cherry had suggested more than once that they could sell it to help with the bills. But Noah couldn't bring himself to part with it, until tonight. Even when the pawn shop owner had offered him $500 last month, Noah had walked away, the weight of his father's memory too heavy to shed for mere money. As he turned down Madison Street, where the wind tunneled between tall buildings with particular fury, a sound caught his attention, a muffled cough coming from the shadows of a closed coffee shop's doorway. Noah hesitated, his conscience battling with his desire to get home quickly. The neighborhood wasn't particularly safe after dark, and Cherry would worry if he was late. The cough came again, followed by a weak voice. "Just need to rest a minute." Stepping closer, Noah saw an elderly man huddled in the corner, his thin jacket offering little protection against the cruel winter night. The man's weathered face bore the dignified features of someone who had seen better days, and a veteran's cap sat askew on his gray hair. His hands, marked with age spots and prominent veins, trembled slightly as he tried to rub warmth back into his arms. "Sir?" Noah called softly, approaching carefully. "Are you all right?" The man looked up, his blue eyes clouded with exhaustion but still sharp, holding a hint of military bearing that years of hardship hadn't quite erased. "I'm fine, son. Just waiting for the shelter to open." He coughed again, his whole body shaking with the effort, the sound deep and worrying. "The shelter?" Noah glanced at his phone, the screen illuminating his concerned face. "Sir, it's past 9. The shelter closed its intake an hour ago." Jimmy Reynolds, as the man introduced himself, had walked 3 miles trying to reach the shelter before closing time, but his bad knee had slowed him down. "Got this bum knee in Desert Storm," he explained with a hint of pride mixed with resignation. "Usually it doesn't give me too much trouble, but this cold." He trailed off, another shiver racking his frame. He thought about Lily, who had asked just that morning if their father would ever come back, her small voice full of a hope that made his heart ache. He thought about Cherry working another late shift to keep their family afloat, her smile becoming rarer with each passing month. And he thought about this stranger, a veteran who had served his country, now shivering in a doorway on a street full of people too busy to notice. Without letting himself think too hard about it, Noah shrugged off the jacket. "Here," he said, holding it out to Jimmy. "Take this, please." Jimmy's eyes widened, a flash of pride crossing his face. "Son, I can't take your coat. You'll freeze." "I'm just heading home," Noah insisted, though home was still 15 blocks away and the wind was picking up. "And this jacket. It deserves to help someone who needs it more than I do." As he draped the jacket over Jimmy's shoulders, Noah felt a strange mix of loss and peace. The leather still held the warmth of his own body, and for a moment, he could almost hear his father's voice telling him he'd done the right thing. The jacket looked different on Jimmy, less like a prized possession and more like what it was meant to be, protection against the cold. "God bless you, son," Jimmy whispered, pulling the jacket close, his fingers running appreciatively over the quality leather. "What's your name?" "Noah. Noah Davis." "Noah Davis," Jimmy repeated softly, his voice carrying a weight Noah couldn't quite understand. "You're a rare kind of person in this world." Noah gave him a small smile before turning away, the cold immediately biting through his thin sweater. As he walked home in the rain, his arms wrapped tightly around himself, he tried not to think about what his mother would say when she saw him without the jacket. But somehow, despite the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones, his heart was warmer than it had been in years. Little did Noah know that this act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him, in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Noah's teeth chattered as he climbed the creaking stairs to their third-floor apartment, each step echoing in the dimly lit stairwell. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting strange shadows on the peeling wallpaper that had probably been cheerful decades ago. The building's ancient radiators clanked and hissed, pushing out barely enough heat to take the edge off the bitter cold that seemed to seep through every crack and crevice. His key turned in the lock with its familiar stubborn resistance, 3/4 right, slight pressure up, then another quarter turn. The ritual was as familiar as breathing after 3 years in this building. As he stepped inside, the relative warmth of home wrapped around him like a thin blanket. Not quite enough, but better than nothing. Lily was curled up on their worn couch, a piece of furniture they'd rescued from a neighbor's bulk trash that Cherry had cleaned meticulously before allowing it into their home. His sister was surrounded by textbooks and wrapped in their mother's old quilt, a family heirloom that had seen better days but still carried the warmth of generations. She looked up as Noah entered, her dark eyes immediately going to his shoulders where their father's jacket should have been. "Noah?" she asked, her voice small and worried. "Where's Dad's jacket?" Before Noah could answer, Cherry emerged from the kitchen, still in her pale blue hospital scrubs, her hair tied back in a messy bun that couldn't quite contain the strands escaping around her face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes like bruises, testament to too many double shifts and too little rest. But she managed a tired smile that faded as she noticed her son's appearance. "Noah, you're soaking wet. Where's your guy?" She trailed off, realization dawning on her face as her eyes traced the empty space where the jacket should be. Noah stood in the doorway, water dripping from his clothes onto the worn carpet, creating dark spots that spread like ink stains. The sound of each drop seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "Mom, I can explain," he started, his voice trembling slightly from the cold and something else. Fear, perhaps, of disappointment in his mother's eyes. Cherry crossed the room quickly, her nurse's instincts taking over as she felt his ice-cold hands. Her own hands were warm and slightly rough from constant washing and sanitizing at the hospital. "Get changed first," she ordered, motherly concern overriding any questions. "You'll catch your death." Lily, "Get your brother some hot chocolate." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 10 minutes later, Noah sat at their small kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of the lavender dryer sheets Cherry splurged on once a month, because they reminded her of her own mother. He clutched a mug of hot chocolate that Lily had insisted on making, carefully measuring out the last of their cheap powder with the precision of someone who knew exactly how long it needed to last. The drink didn't taste quite right, too watery and not sweet enough. But the warmth was welcome. Cherry sat across from him, her own cup of coffee untouched, the steam rising between them like a fragile barrier. "There was this veteran," Noah began, staring into his mug as if the swirling chocolate might help him find the right words. "He missed the shelter's curfew, and he was just sitting there in the cold. He fought in Desert Storm, Mom, and his knee was bothering him and—" The words tumbled out, trying to justify a decision he wasn't entirely sure about anymore, even though something deep in his heart told him it had been right. Cherry's expression softened as she listened, the worry lines around her eyes easing slightly. She reached across the table and took Noah's hand, her own still warm from the coffee mug. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of single parenthood and countless sacrifices. "That jacket. It was just a thing. What you did with it matters more than keeping it." Lily, who had been listening from the doorway, patted over in her mismatched sock feet and wrapped her arms around Noah's shoulders. Her touch was gentle, almost protective, as if she sensed her big brother needed comforting for once instead of being the comforter. "Does this mean Dad's jacket is helping someone else now?" she asked, wisdom beyond her years coloring her words. Noah nodded, pulling his sister close, breathing in the familiar scent of the drugstore shampoo they all shared. "Yeah, it is. Someone who really needed it." That night, as the wind howled outside their window like a hungry animal, Noah lay awake in his narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the city below. Sirens wailed in the distance, and somewhere a car alarm bleated rhythmically into the darkness. His thoughts kept drifting to Jimmy Reynolds, wondering if the veteran had found somewhere warm to sleep, if the jacket was keeping him comfortable. The loss of his father's last gift ached like a bruise, but somehow it felt right, like maybe this was what the jacket had been meant for all along. Morning came too quickly, Seattle's perpetually gray sky barely brightening as Noah's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., early enough to help Lily get ready for school before Cherry returned from her night shift. Their morning routine was a well-choreographed dance of sharing the bathroom, making sure Lily ate breakfast and double-checking homework. Every movement was practiced, efficient, born from necessity, and the knowledge that time was a luxury they couldn't afford to waste. "Don't forget your science project," Noah reminded Lily as he packed her lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, the best they could manage this week. The bread was getting slightly stale, but Noah had learned to cut off the crusts in a way that made it less noticeable. "It's in my backpack," Lily answered, carefully braiding her hair the way their mother had taught her. Tongue stuck out in concentration as she worked with the elastic band that had been repaired twice with knots. "Mr. Patterson said it might win first place." Noah smiled, remembering how they'd spent hours working on the project together, using recycled materials to build a working model of a wind turbine. They'd scavenged most of the parts from the building's maintenance dumpster, turning trash into something that made Lily's eyes shine with pride. She had inherited their mother's determination and their father's creativity, a combination that made Noah both proud and protective. At school, Noah tried to focus on his classes, but his mind kept drifting. In AP Physics, Mr. Patterson noticed his distraction, the way his usually sharp answers came just a beat too late. "Everything all right, Noah?" he asked after class, his concerned gaze taking in Noah's jacketless appearance. "You seemed a million miles away today." Noah hesitated before telling his favorite teacher about Jimmy and the jacket. Mr. Patterson listened thoughtfully, then smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. You know, Noah, sometimes the most valuable things we own are worth more when we give them away. He paused, then added quietly, Your father's jacket kept him warm. Now it's keeping someone else warm. That's a kind of immortality, don't you think? The words stayed with Noah as he headed to his job at Hanson's Grocery. The store's owner, Mrs. Hanson, was strict but fair, and the job helped put food on their table. As he stocked shelves and dawn broke over Seattle with unusual clarity, the storm clouds finally parting to reveal a crystalline winter morning. Frost patterns decorated the windows of the Davis apartment, their intricate designs catching the early light like nature's stained glass. Noah woke to the sound of voices outside, unusual for their quiet street, especially this early. Through the thin walls, he heard Cherry's voice, tense with concern. What do you mean, reporters? We're just a normal family. Noah sat up, instantly alert. The springs of his mattress creaked in protest as he moved to the window, pulling back the threadbare curtain. Below, a small crowd had gathered in front of their building. 2 news vans were parked at the curb, their satellite dishes reaching toward the pale morning sky like metal flowers. A reporter in a red coat stood on their front steps, microphone in hand, while her cameraman adjusted his equipment. Noah? Lily appeared in his doorway, still in her pajamas, her eyes wide with confusion. There are people taking pictures of our building. Did something happen? Before Noah could answer, Cherry appeared behind Lily, still in her nurse's scrubs from her night shift. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and worry. Noah, honey, you need to see this. She held out her phone, open to a local news website. The headline made his heart skip a beat. Seattle teen's sacrifice goes viral. Security camera captures extraordinary act of kindness. The article was accompanied by a grainy video from a coffee shop's security camera. Even in the poor quality footage, Noah could clearly see himself giving his jacket to Jimmy. Someone had posted it online, and overnight it had spread like wildfire across social media. The comment section overflowed with people moved by the simple act of kindness, many sharing their own stories of struggle and compassion. There's more, Cherry said, softly, scrolling down. The man you helped. Jimmy Reynolds? His daughter has been looking for him for months. She saw the video this morning. A knock at their door made them all jump. Cherry smoothed her hair back with trembling hands before opening it, revealing Mr. Patterson standing in the hallway, his tie slightly askew as if he'd dressed in a hurry. I saw the news, he said, stepping inside. The school's already received dozens of calls from media outlets wanting to interview Noah. He turned to Noah, his expression serious. You don't have to talk to any of them if you don't want to. But there's someone else who'd like to speak with you. Diana Reynolds, Jimmy's daughter. She's waiting downstairs. Noah's legs felt weak as he quickly changed into fresh clothes. His worn jeans and faded sweater suddenly seemed inadequate for meeting someone who, according to Mr. Patterson, was the CEO of a major tech company. But there wasn't time to worry about that. In the building's small lobby, a woman in an impeccably tailored suit stood looking at the bulletin board covered with community notices and old takeout menus. She turned as Noah approached, and he was struck by how much her eyes resembled Jimmy's, the same shade of blue, the same hint of military bearing. Noah Davis? Her voice was steady, but her hands clasped and unclasped nervously. I'm Diana Reynolds. You met my father last night. Noah nodded, unable to find words. Diana took a deep breath, composing herself. My father. Jimmy. He's a proud man. After my mother died, he struggled. PTSD from his service made it hard for him to accept help, even from family. He disappeared 6 months ago, and I've been searching ever since. She stepped closer, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. Your kindness. Giving him your jacket. It didn't just keep him warm. It reminded him that accepting help isn't a weakness. After you left, he called me for the first time in months. He's at Seattle General now being treated for exposure and pneumonia, but he's going to be okay. Tears gleamed in Diana's eyes as she continued. "The jacket you gave him? My grandfather wore one just like it in Korea. When Jimmy saw it, he said it felt like a sign, like maybe it was time to come home." Cherry, who had followed Noah downstairs, stepped forward. "The jacket belonged to Noah's father," she explained quietly. "He left us 3 years ago. It was all Noah had left of him." Diana's eyes widened with understanding. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "Your sacrifice meant everything. You gave up something precious to help a stranger. Now please let me help your family in return." The envelope contained a check, an amount that made Cherry gasp when she saw it. But more than that, it contained a letter offering Noah a full scholarship to any college of his choice, funded through the Reynolds Foundation. "This isn't charity," Diana said firmly, seeing the hesitation on their faces. "This is an investment in someone who understands that true value isn't in possessions, but in how we treat each other. My father taught me that once. Last night, you taught it to him again." Outside, the reporters still waited, eager for their story. But in that modest lobby, with morning light streaming through dusty windows, a different kind of story was unfolding. One about how a single act of kindness could bridge the gaps between broken families and heal wounds that money couldn't touch. Noah looked at the envelope in his hands, then at his mother's tears of joy, and finally at Diana's grateful smile. The loss of his father's jacket still ached, but now it felt like the beginning of something, rather than an ending. Dee helped customers. He couldn't help but scan the faces of everyone who came in, wondering if by some chance Jimmy might appear, wearing the familiar leather jacket. The day ended with a light dusting of snow, unusual for Seattle, transforming the grimy streets into something almost magical. Noah worked until closing, then stepped out into the cold night. Without the jacket, the wind cut through his layers like knives, finding every gap and seam. But as he walked home, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the snowflakes caught the streetlights, turning the air into a shower of diamonds, or maybe it was the memory of Jimmy's grateful eyes. But Noah felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if something important was about to happen. He couldn't have known then just how right that feeling would prove to be. Dawn broke over Seattle with unusual clarity, the storm clouds finally parting to reveal a crystalline winter morning. Frost patterns decorated the windows of the Davis apartment, their intricate designs catching the early light like nature's stained glass. Noah woke to the sound of voices outside, unusual for their quiet street, especially this early. Through the thin walls, he heard Cherry's voice, tense with concern. "What do you mean, reporters? We're just a normal family." Noah sat up, instantly alert. The springs of his mattress creaked in protest as he moved to the window, pulling back the threadbare curtain. Below, a small crowd had gathered in front of their building. 2 news vans were parked at the curb, their satellite dishes reaching toward the pale morning sky like metal flowers. A reporter in a red coat stood on their front steps, microphone in hand, while her cameraman adjusted his equipment. "Noah?" Lily appeared in his doorway, still in her pajamas, her eyes wide with confusion. "There are people taking pictures of our building. Did something happen?" Before Noah could answer, Cherry appeared behind Lily, still in her nurse's scrubs from her night shift. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and worry. "Noah, honey, you need to see this." She held out her phone, open to a local news website. The headline made his heart skip a beat. "Seattle teen's sacrifice goes viral. Security camera captures extraordinary act of kindness." The article was accompanied by a grainy video from a coffee shop's security camera. Even in the poor quality footage, Noah could clearly see himself giving his jacket to Jimmy. Someone had posted it online, and overnight it had spread like wildfire across social media. The comment section overflowed with people moved by the simple act of kindness, many sharing their own stories of struggle and compassion. "There's more," Cherry said softly, scrolling down. "The man you helped." "Jimmy Reynolds? His daughter has been looking for him for months. She saw the video this morning." A knock at their door made them all jump. Cherry smoothed her hair back with trembling hands before opening it, revealing Mr. Patterson standing in the hallway, his tie slightly askew as if he'd dressed in a hurry. "I saw the news," he said, stepping inside. The school's already received dozens of calls from media outlets wanting to interview Noah. He turned to Noah, his expression serious. "You don't have to talk to any of them if you don't want to, but there's someone else who'd like to speak with you. Diana Reynolds, Jimmy's daughter. She's waiting downstairs." Noah's legs felt weak as he quickly changed into fresh clothes. His worn jeans and faded sweater suddenly seemed inadequate for meeting someone who, according to Mr. Patterson, was the CEO of a major tech company. But there wasn't time to worry about that. In the building's small lobby, a woman in an impeccably tailored suit stood looking at the bulletin board covered with community notices and old takeout menus. She turned as Noah approached, and he was struck by how much her eyes resembled Jimmy's. The same shade of blue, the same hint of military bearing. "Noah Davis?" Her voice was steady, but her hands clasped and unclasped nervously. "I'm Diana Reynolds. You met my father last night." Noah nodded, unable to find words. Diana took a deep breath, composing herself. "My father. Jimmy. He's a proud man. After my mother died, he struggled. PTSD from his service made it hard for him to accept help, even from family. He disappeared 6 months ago, and I've been searching ever since." She stepped closer, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Your kindness. Giving him your jacket. It didn't just keep him warm. It reminded him that accepting help isn't a weakness. After you left, he called me for the first time in months. He's at Seattle General now, being treated for exposure and pneumonia, but he's going to be okay." Tears gleamed in Diana's eyes as she continued. "The jacket you gave him? My grandfather wore one just like it in Korea. When Jimmy saw it, he said it felt like a sign. Like maybe it was time to come home." Cherry, who had followed Noah downstairs, stepped forward. "The jacket belonged to Noah's father," she explained quietly. "He left us 3 years ago. It was all Noah had left of him." Diana's eyes widened with understanding. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "Your sacrifice meant everything. You gave up something precious to help a stranger. Now please let me help your family in return." The envelope contained a check, an amount that made Cherry gasp when she saw it. But more than that, it contained a letter offering Noah a full scholarship to any college of his choice, funded through the Reynolds Foundation. "This isn't charity," Diana said firmly, seeing the hesitation on their faces. "This is an investment in someone who understands that true value isn't in possessions, but in how we treat each other. My father taught me that once. Last night, you taught it to him again." Outside, the reporters still waited, eager for their story. But in that modest lobby with morning light streaming through dusty windows, a different kind of story was unfolding. One about how a single act of kindness could bridge the gaps between broken families and heal wounds that money couldn't touch. Noah looked at the envelope in his hands, then at his mother's tears of joy, and finally at Diana's grateful smile. The loss of his father's jacket still ached, but now it felt like the beginning of something rather than an ending. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity that transformed the Davis family's quiet life into something unrecognizable. Their small apartment, usually echoing with the familiar sounds of radiator pipes and distant traffic, now buzzed with phone calls and unexpected visitors. Local news stations competed for interviews, while social media exploded with shares of the security camera footage. Cherry took a rare day off from the hospital to help manage the sudden attention. She sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by business cards from reporters and well-wishers, her hands trembling slightly as she sorted through them. "I never thought your father's jacket would bring all this," she murmured, more to herself than to Noah. The apartment's buzzer sounded again, the 5th time that morning. This time it was Mrs. Hanson from the grocery store, clutching a newspaper. "Noah, dear, you're on the front page," she exclaimed, her usually stern face bright with excitement. The headline read, Vintage jacket becomes symbol of hope. Teen sacrifice reunites veteran with family. But the most significant change came in the form of Jimmy Reynolds himself. Released from the hospital after treatment for pneumonia, he insisted on visiting the Davis family. Diana drove him in her Tesla Model X, helping him navigate the stairs to their apartment with patient care that spoke of mending relationships. Jimmy looked different now. Cleaned up, wearing fresh clothes and carrying himself with renewed dignity. But Noah's father's jacket still hung on his shoulders, the leather gleaming softly in the morning light. "I wanted to return this," Jimmy said, starting to shrug off the jacket, but Noah raised his hand to stop him. "Keep it," Noah said firmly. "It looks right on you." And it did, as if the jacket had found its true purpose after years of waiting. Jimmy's weathered face creased with emotion. "You know, this jacket, it's not just about keeping warm. It's about dignity. When you gave it to me, you didn't just see a homeless veteran. You saw a person worthy of help." He reached into the jacket's pocket and pulled out a small box. "Which is why I want you to have this." Inside the box lay a military medal, a bronze star with a combat V for valor. "I earned this in Desert Storm," Jimmy explained, his voice thick with memory. "They give it for acts of heroism. Seems to me what you did that night was pretty heroic." Diana stood by the window, watching the exchange with glistening eyes. "We've set up the scholarship fund," she announced, changing the subject before emotion could overwhelm the room. "But there's something else we'd like to discuss." She laid out a proposal that made Cherry sink into her chair in disbelief. The Reynolds Foundation wanted to establish a program in Noah's name, the Davis Compassion Initiative. It would provide emergency housing and support for veterans in crisis, starting in Seattle but with plans to expand nationwide. "Your act of kindness showed us a gap in the system," Diana explained. "A veteran shouldn't have to choose between pride and survival. We want to create a network of support that honors both." While the adults discussed details, Lily tugged at Noah's sleeve. "Does this mean we don't have to worry about the heating bill anymore?" she whispered, her young face serious with concern. Noah pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of their shared drugstore shampoo. "No more worrying about bills," he promised. The weight of constant anxiety about money, about keeping their family afloat, began to lift from his shoulders. That evening, after the visitors had gone and the apartment settled into an unfamiliar quiet, Noah sat with Cherry on their small balcony. The Seattle skyline glittered before them, city lights piercing the usual fog like stars. "Your father would be proud," Cherry said softly, echoing her words from that first night. "Not because of the money or the attention, but because you stayed true to who you are." Noah thought about his father's jacket, now serving a new purpose. He thought about Jimmy's medal, sitting on his dresser like a beacon of unexpected honor. Most of all, he thought about how a single choice on a cold night had rippled outward, touching lives he'd never imagined reaching. Mr. Patterson had been right. Some things were worth more when given away. The jacket had been a symbol of his father's absence, but in letting it go, Noah had found something greater: the power to create change, to bridge divides, to transform loss into hope. As if reading his thoughts, Cherry squeezed his hand. "Sometimes the best gifts we receive come from what we're willing to give," she said. "You taught me that, Noah." In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the city canyons. It's a lonely sound carrying the promise of journeys yet to come. Noah knew their lives would never be the same, but for the first time in years, change felt like an adventure rather than a threat. The jacket of fate, as the media had taken to calling it, had started a story none of them could have predicted. But sitting there with his mother, watching the city lights dance, Noah realized it wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. 2 weeks after the jacket incident, Noah stood in the gleaming lobby of the Reynolds Foundation headquarters, his reflection barely recognizable in the polished marble floors. The building stretched 40 stories into the Seattle sky, its glass exterior catching the rare winter sunlight like a tower of diamonds. The contrast between this pristine space and their cramped apartment felt almost dizzying. Diana had arranged for new clothes for the entire family, Cherry in an elegant navy pantsuit that made her stand straighter, Lily in a fresh dress that she kept twirling in despite her mother's gentle reminders to stay still, and Noah in dark slacks and a blue blazer that felt simultaneously foreign and empowering. Security guards in crisp uniforms nodded respectfully as they passed, their earpieces gleaming. The lobby fountain created a soothing background melody that barely masked Noah's thundering heart. Everything seemed designed to impress, from the living wall of cascading plants to the artistic installation of floating glass spheres that caught and reflected light in mesmerizing patterns. "Ready?" Diana asked, appearing beside them in her signature power suit, her presence somehow both intimidating and reassuring. Her heels clicked authoritatively on the marble as she led them toward the conference room, where they would officially launch the Davis Compassion Initiative. "Remember," she added softly, "just for Noah, you're not here because of luck. You're here because you showed us all what real courage looks like." The conference room took up half the 40th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Seattle that made Noah's head spin. The space was packed with journalists from every major network, business leaders in expensive suits and veteran advocacy groups wearing their service pins proudly. Jimmy sat in the front row, still wearing Noah's father's jacket, now professionally cleaned but retaining its vintage character. The leather seemed to glow under the sophisticated lighting system, a humble hero among the luxury. Beside him sat Dr. Lopez from the community center and Mr. Patterson, both beaming with pride. The podium stood center stage, backed by a massive screen displaying the initiative's logo, a stylized jacket silhouette transformed into a protective embrace. Diana had worked with designers for days to create something that captured the essence of Noah's gesture without feeling exploitative. Diana stepped up to the podium, her presence commanding immediate attention. The subtle power of her voice through the state-of-the-art sound system filled every corner of the room. 3 weeks ago, a 16-year-old boy gave away his most precious possession to help a stranger. That single act of kindness didn't just change 2 lives. It revealed a critical gap in how we support our veterans, and had inspired a solution. She outlined the initiative's ambitious plans with the precision of someone used to making billion-dollar deals, a network of emergency housing units across Seattle, staffed by social workers and veteran volunteers. Each location would provide not just shelter but dignity, private rooms designed with trauma-informed care principles, career counseling with direct links to tech industry jobs, and mental health support provided by professionals who specialized in veteran care. The program would prioritize keeping veteran families together, addressing a key factor that often prevented people like Jimmy from seeking help. But this initiative isn't just about housing, Diana continued, her voice warming with genuine passion. It's about creating connections. Each resident will have the opportunity to mentor local youth, sharing their skills and experiences. In return, these young people will help our veterans navigate technology, social media, and the modern job market. We're not just building shelters, we're building bridges between generations. Noah listened from his seat, amazed at how his simple act had evolved into something so comprehensive. The initiative had already secured funding for its first year of operations, with several major tech companies pledging ongoing support. Projected figures on the screen showed the potential impact. Hundreds of veterans helped, thousands of mentorship hours, millions in community investment. When it was Noah's turn to speak, he approached the podium with trembling hands but a steady heart. The speech he'd practiced with Cherry felt inadequate now, typed words on note cards that couldn't capture the real truth of what had happened. So he spoke from his soul instead, letting the expensive microphone carry his honest words to every corner of the room. "The jacket I gave away was my last connection to my father," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But what I've learned is that sometimes letting go of something precious creates space for something even more valuable. This initiative isn't about charity. It's about recognizing the dignity in every person, about understanding that we're all one difficult moment away from needing help. Jimmy stood up slowly, leaning on his cane, the jacket moving with him like a second skin. "This jacket," he said, touching the leather reverently, "it's become a symbol. But the real power isn't in the jacket itself. It's in what it represents. Sometimes the smallest gesture can remind someone that they're worth saving." After the formal presentations, while reporters clamored for interviews and photographers captured the moment for posterity, Cherry pulled Noah aside into a quiet corner by the windows. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was radiant. "I've been saving something," she said, reaching into her new purse. "I think now is the right time." She handed Noah a creased envelope, the paper soft from years of handling. Inside was a photograph he'd never seen before, his father wearing the jacket, standing proud in front of their old house, his smile carefree in a way Noah barely remembered. But it was the letter accompanying the photo that made Noah's hands shake. "Your father wrote this the day he left," Cherry explained softly, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I was too angry to share it before, but now I think you need to read it." The letter was brief, the handwriting rushed but clear. "Cherry, I'm not the man you and Noah deserve. This weakness in me, this darkness, I can't let it touch him. The jacket is all I have worth giving. Tell him to wear it with more courage than I had. Tell him sometimes the bravest thing isn't holding on, it's letting go." Cringe. Noah read the words 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of meaning. His father's departure had always felt like abandonment, but now he saw it differently, as a broken man's attempt to protect his family, the only way he knew how. The Portland VA Medical Center stood against a gray Oregon sky, its brick facade weathered by decades of rain. Noah sat in Diana's Tesla, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. Cherry held his hand from the back seat, her grip steady despite her own visible anxiety. After 3 years of silence, they were finally going to see James Davis. "He's been here for 8 months, Diana explained gently, turning off the engine. "When he saw the news about the jacket, he reached out to us. He's been working with therapists, dealing with his PTSD from his time in Afghanistan. He's doing the work, Noah." The hospital corridors seemed endless, each step echoing with the weight of unspoken words. Their footsteps squeaked against the freshly waxed floors as a nurse led them to a small garden courtyard. And there he was, James Davis, sitting on a wooden bench, looking both familiar and strange. He'd lost weight, and gray streaked his dark hair, but his posture still held that military bearing Noah remembered from childhood. He wore hospital-issued clothes, a stark contrast to the sharp image Noah held in his memories. When he saw them, he stood slowly, uncertainty written across his face. "Noah," he said, his voice rougher than Noah remembered. "Cherry." His eyes moved between them, taking in the changes 3 years had carved. "You've grown so tall," he added softly to Noah, then fell silent, words failing him. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Noah felt the absence of the jacket acutely. It had always been a buffer between them, a shared connection. Now they stood exposed, 3 people trying to navigate the space where a family used to be. "I saw what you did," James finally said. "With my jacket. The old man, the veteran." He swallowed hard. "It was the right thing. Better than anything I ever did with it." Cherry stepped forward, her nurse's instincts picking up on James's trembling hands. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, not unkindly. "About PTSD? We could have faced it together." James sank back onto the bench, gesturing for them to join him. The garden's small fountain provided a gentle backdrop as he began to speak. "After my last tour, everything felt wrong. Loud noises, crowds, even our neighbor's dog barking. It all sent me spiraling. I couldn't sleep, couldn't be the husband or father you deserved." He looked at Noah, his eyes full of pain. "The jacket was from my own father. He wore it coming home from Vietnam. Said it helped him feel human again. I thought it would do the same for me, but sometimes holding on hurts more than letting go, Noah finished, remembering the words from the letter. James nodded, tears spilling onto his cheeks. Watching you give it away, seeing how it helped that man, Jimmy Reynolds, it was like a sign. If my son could be that brave, maybe I could too. A nurse appeared with cups of coffee, giving them a moment to collect themselves. Cherry wrapped her hands around her cup, steam rising between her and her estranged husband. What happens now? She asked. I'm not asking to come home, James said quickly. I haven't earned that, but I'd like to be part of your lives again if you'll let me. I want to know my children. Meet Lily. Do the work to deserve a second chance. Noah thought about Jimmy Reynolds, about how the jacket had given him the courage to reconnect with Diana. He thought about his own journey from anger to understanding. The initiative, he said suddenly. We're helping veterans rebuild their lives. Maybe. Maybe you could help with that. When you're ready. James's eyes lit up with the first real hope Noah had seen in them. The Davis Compassion Initiative. Diana told me about it. You've built something extraordinary, son. Something that helps people find their way home. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of their separated lives. James listened with pride as Noah described the initiative's plans, offering insights from his own experience. Cherry shared stories about Lily, showing pictures on her phone that made James smile through his tears. As the afternoon light began to fade, painting the garden in soft shadows, Noah realized something had shifted. The pain of his father's absence hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else. Understanding, maybe even the beginnings of forgiveness. Walking back to the car, Cherry slipped her hand into Noah's. You okay? Yeah, he said, surprising himself with how true it felt. I think we all will be. Diana waited by the car, her presence a reminder of how much had changed since that cold night when Noah gave away the jacket. Ready to head home? She asked. Noah nodded, but home meant something different now. It wasn't just their apartment or the memories of what they'd lost. Home was the future they were building, the bridges they were repairing, the lives they were changing. One act of kindness rippling outward, touching everything in its path. As they drove back to Seattle, Noah thought about the jacket, now warming Jimmy Reynolds as he worked with other veterans at the initiative. Some things, he realized, had to be given away to find their true purpose. And sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as losses, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true value. 6 months after the launch of the Davis Compassion Initiative, the program had grown beyond anyone's expectations. The first veteran housing center, a renovated boutique hotel in downtown Seattle, stood as a testament to what compassion could build. Its red brick exterior had been restored to its 1920s glory, while the interior balanced modern comfort with dignified elegance. The building's lobby, once cold and institutional, now displayed a carefully curated collection of black and white photographs, stories of transformation captured through a lens of hope. Among them, prominently featured in the center, was the security camera image that had started it all, Noah giving his jacket to Jimmy. The space hummed with life now. Veterans gathered in comfortable seating areas sharing coffee and conversation. Children's artwork decorated the walls of the education center, where after-school programs ran daily. The scent of fresh-baked bread wafted from the culinary training kitchen where veterans learned skills for food service careers. Noah walked through this vibrant scene daily now, having taken on a role as student coordinator for the initiative's mentorship program. His afternoons were spent matching veteran residents with local students for tutoring and skill-sharing sessions. The sound of laughter and conversation filled rooms that had once echoed with emptiness. Yesterday he'd watched a Vietnam veteran teaching calculus to a group of wide-eyed high school students, while down the hall, a teenage computer whiz helped elderly veterans navigate social media. Jimmy Reynolds, still wearing the leather jacket that had become the initiative's unofficial symbol, led the veteran outreach program with quiet authority. The jacket had aged beautifully, its leather developing a rich patina that seemed to tell the story of its journey. Every scuff and wrinkle added character like the laugh lines on a beloved face. Today he was meeting with a group of newly arrived veterans, his calm presence and understanding eyes helping ease their transition. He visited Seattle twice a month now, splitting his time between continued treatment in Portland and rebuilding relationships with his family. Each visit brought small steps of progress. A game of chess with Noah where they talked about more than just moves on the board, a bedtime story for Lily that ended in real laughter, a quiet conversation with Cherry about healing and hope over coffee in their old neighborhood diner. Diana approached the podium with measured steps, her professional demeanor softened by genuine emotion. The lights dimmed slightly as she began to speak, drawing all eyes forward. 6 months ago, we launched this initiative believing that one act of kindness could inspire others. Today, we've helped 35 veterans and their families find not just housing, but community. Our mentorship program has logged over 3,000 hours of connection and learning. But numbers don't tell the whole story. She gestured to the screen behind her, where images began to play, set to gentle music. Veterans teaching teenagers auto repair in the center's workshop, their hands guided with patience born of understanding. Students helping elderly residents navigate smartphones, bridging the digital divide with respect and humor. Families sharing meals and stories in the communal kitchen, the barriers between military and civilian life dissolving over shared recipes and laughter. This is about transformation, Diana continued, her voice carrying the weight of truth. It's about understanding that every person has something to give and something to learn. It's about recognizing that healing happens in community, that purpose can be found in serving others, and that it's never too late to start again. Noah watched from his seat between Cherry and Lily, feeling the weight of Jimmy's medal in his pocket. He carried it with him always now, a reminder of how unexpected gifts could change lives in ways that defied imagination. Lily squeezed his hand, her face glowing with pride for her big brother, while Cherry's eyes shimmered with happy tears. The jacket that had once symbolized loss now represented connection, its story woven into the fabric of countless other stories of redemption and renewal. Through the windows, the Seattle sunset painted the sky in shades of promise, as if nature itself was celebrating their success. Noah watched as veterans and students, family members, and volunteers moved through the room like threads weaving a new tapestry of community. The jacket had started their story, but it was their choices, their commitment to kindness and understanding, that would write its future chapters. 1 year to the day since Noah had given away his father's jacket, the Davis family stood in front of their new home. It wasn't a mansion or anything extravagant, but the modest 3-bedroom Craftsman with its wraparound porch and white picket fence represented everything they'd achieved. The morning sun cast long shadows across the frost-covered lawn, glinting off the dew-kissed grass like scattered diamonds. Their breath came out in visible puffs in the chilly air, a reminder of that fateful winter night that had changed everything. Cherry held the keys in her trembling hands, the metal warm from her nervous grip. Lily bounced excitedly on the balls of her feet, her winter coat slightly too big. Room to grow into, Cherry had said when buying it, a luxury they could finally afford. The house had been a joint effort. Part of Noah's scholarship fund from the Reynolds Foundation had been converted into a housing grant, and Cherry's promotion to head nurses coordinator at the hospital had helped secure the mortgage. Even James had contributed, sending part of his VA benefits to help with the down payment, his way of slowly rebuilding the trust he'd broken. "Well," Cherry said, her voice thick with emotion, the keys jingling softly as she approached the front door. "Shall we go inside?" The interior smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, with undertones of cedar from the recently refinished closets. Their footsteps echoed on hardwood floors that needed some polish but held promise in every grain. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, creating pools of warmth on the floor. Each room told a story of possibility. My choice, Jimmy's courage, your vision, Mom's strength. He looked around at the faces of his found family, each one essential to the story. We all played a part. A knock at the door interrupted the moment, the sound echoing through the half-furnished rooms. Cherry opened it to find James standing there looking nervous but determined, his therapy-strengthened resolve evident in his straight shoulders. In his hands, he held a carefully wrapped package, the paper decorated with hand-drawn stars that Lily recognized as her own artwork. He'd asked her to help, keeping it a secret from the others. "I hope it's okay that I came," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of past absences and present hopes. "I wanted to give you something, for the new house." Inside the package was a shadow box, professionally crafted from dark walnut wood that matched the home's original trim. It contained the security camera photo of Noah giving away the jacket, the image now iconic in Seattle's veteran support community. Beside it sat Jimmy's Bronze Star medal, its brass surface gleaming against the dark velvet backing. A small piece of leather, a swatch from the jacket's interior lining that Jimmy had contributed, lay beneath, its worn surface telling silent stories of both loss and redemption. Below these items was an engraved brass plate that read, "Sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones we give away." "I had some help," James admitted, nodding toward Diana, who had helped track down the original security footage. "But the idea, I wanted you to have something that showed how proud I am. Of all of you." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, years of regret and hope tangled in his throat. Cherry wiped tears from her eyes as she helped James hang the shadow box in the living room, their movements careful and coordinated, like a dance of reconciliation. It fit perfectly above the fireplace, catching the light from the windows in a way that made the metal gleam like a beacon. Later, that evening, after their guests had gone and the empty takeout containers had been cleared away, Noah sat on the front porch steps. The neighborhood was quiet, except for distant traffic and the gentle rustle of autumn leaves clinging to nearly bare branches. A year ago, he'd been walking home in the cold, about to make a decision that would change everything. Now here he was, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of possibility from his own front porch. Cherry joined him, wrapping a thick blanket around both their shoulders, its soft warmth a comfort against the growing chill. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, echoing his own words from so many conversations at the initiative. "Just thinking about how things change," Noah replied, leaning slightly into his mother's embrace. "A year ago, we were barely getting by. Now we have this house, the initiatives helping people across the country. Dad's getting better." He paused, collecting his thoughts like gathering precious stones. But it's not just the big things. It's the small moments, too. Like Lily having space for her art, or being able to have family dinners together. The neighborhood streetlights flickered on, one by one, like stars coming out. Noah thought about all the veterans who would sleep safely tonight because of the initiative, all the families finding their way back to each other, all the acts of kindness rippling outward in ways no one could predict. The jacket that had once symbolized loss had become a catalyst for healing, its warmth multiplied beyond measure in the hearts it had touched. 18 months after Noah gave away his father's jacket, he stood backstage at the National Veterans Support Conference in Washington, D.C. The massive convention center's marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the Capitol's iconic monuments. The space buzzed with energy, as thousands of veterans advocates, healthcare providers, and government officials gathered to discuss the future of veteran care. The air held a mixture of coffee, cologne, and anticipation as people in military uniforms and business suits mingled, their voices creating a steady hum of purpose. Diana had just finished presenting the initiative's remarkable statistics, her voice carrying through the state-of-the-art sound system with practiced confidence. 15 cities now hosted initiative centers, with over 1,000 veterans housed and supported. The Revolutionary Mentorship Program had become a model for organizations nationwide, studied by social workers and praised by psychological journals. The leather jacket, now carefully preserved in a custom display case of bulletproof glass and humidity-controlled air, traveled to each new initiative location as a symbol of the program's founding principle, that small acts of kindness could transform lives. Noah adjusted his tie, a hand-picked gift from Jimmy for this occasion. The silk fabric bore a subtle pattern of interlocking stars, chosen to match the Bronze Star medal that still held a place of honor in their home. At 17, he'd grown taller, his shoulders broader, but his eyes still held the same compassion that had driven him to give away his jacket on that cold Seattle night. The suit he wore felt strange, yet appropriate, like the physical manifestation of how far they'd come. Behind him, Cherry squeezed his hand reassuringly, her nurse's ID badge from the Initiative's medical program catching the light. Lily, now 10, practiced reading her part of the speech under her breath, her fingers fidgeting with the charm bracelet that held a tiny silver jacket, a gift from the first group of veterans' children she'd befriended. And now, Diana's voice carried through the speakers, warm with pride, I'd like to introduce the family that inspired it all. The Davis family. They walked onto the stage together, Noah, Cherry, Lily, and James. Yes, James, too. After 18 months of intensive therapy and gradual reconciliation, he had become an integral part of the initiative, leading PTSD support groups and helping other veterans navigate their way back to their families. His military bearing had softened into something more approachable, his once haunted eyes now clear with purpose. The jacket's display case stood center stage, spotlighted. The leather seemed to glow under the careful lighting, each crease and worn spot telling part of its story. Jimmy Reynolds stood beside it, still the program's most powerful ambassador. The years had been kind to him, his once weary face now full of purpose, his silver hair neatly trimmed. His daughter Diana beamed with pride as she stepped aside, giving Noah the podium. A year and a half ago, Noah began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. I had to make a choice between keeping something precious and helping someone in need. What I didn't know then was that sometimes letting go of something opens your hands to receive something greater. The massive screens behind him displayed a map of the initiative's growing network. Each location had its own story. A converted boutique hotel in Portland where veterans taught art classes to local children. A renovated apartment complex in Chicago that included a community garden. A repurposed school building in Atlanta now housing both veteran families and a job training center. But more than buildings, they were beacons of hope. Places where veterans could find not just shelter but purpose. The audience sat in rapt attention as each Davis family member shared their part of the story. Cherry spoke about the innovative healthcare program she'd developed, helping veterans transition between VA and civilian medical care. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen both the problems and solutions firsthand. James described how the initiative's family counseling services had given him tools to rebuild trust with his loved ones, his testimony drawing knowing nods from other veterans in the crowd. Diana returned to the podium to make the day's big announcement, her business suit a perfect blend of corporate authority and approachable warmth. Today, the Davis Compassion Initiative is launching a national expansion. With support from major corporations and government partnerships, we'll open 50 new centers over the next 5 years. But more than that, we're introducing the Jacket Scholarship Program. The screens changed to show young people in graduation caps and gowns, their faces bright with possibility. Every year, we'll provide full college scholarships to 100 children of veterans, chosen not just for academic achievement, but for demonstrating the same spirit of compassion that Noah showed that night. The applause was thunderous, rolling through the convention center like waves, but the real power of the moment lay in the quiet tears and proud smiles of the veterans and families in attendance. They understood that this wasn't just about buildings or programs or scholarships. It was about recognition that every person had value, that every act of kindness could ripple outward in unexpected ways. After the ceremony, the Davis family gathered in a quiet corner of the convention center, away from the congratulatory crowds and media requests. The marble walls created a peaceful alcove where they could process the magnitude of what had just happened. Jimmy joined them, carefully carrying something wrapped in cream-colored tissue paper, tied with a simple blue ribbon. I think it's time, he said, his voice gentle as he handed the package to Noah. The paper crinkled softly as Noah unwrapped it, revealing a piece of the jacket's lining carefully removed during its preservation. The leather was soft as butter, its worn surface holding years of stories. A reminder, Jimmy said softly, watching Noah run his fingers over the familiar texture, that the best things in life aren't things at all. They're the choices we make, the people we help, the love we share. Noah held the piece of leather, feeling its warmth seep into his palm. So much had changed since that winter night, yet the essence of his choice remained beautifully simple. Faced with someone in need, he had chosen kindness. Everything else, the initiative, the reunited families, the transformed lives, had grown from that single seed of compassion planted on a cold Seattle street. 2 years to the day since Noah gave away his father's jacket, the Davis family gathered in their backyard for a special celebration. The space had been transformed with twinkling lights strung between trees and tables decorated with flowers from their garden. The Seattle weather had cooperated for once, providing a clear evening sky painted in spectacular shades of purple and gold. The guest list included faces both familiar and new: Jimmy Reynolds, looking distinguished in a suit but still wearing the famous jacket; Diana in a casual sundress that softened her usual corporate appearance; Mr. Patterson beaming with pride at his former student; and Dr. Lopez sharing stories with Cherry about the initiative's latest medical outreach program. Dozens of veterans and their families mingled with local students and community members, all connected by the ripple effects of one act of kindness. Noah, now 18 and preparing for college in the fall, stood by the grill with James, who had mastered the art of perfect hamburgers during their monthly father-son cookouts. Their relationship, once fractured by PTSD and absence, had grown stronger through shared work at the initiative and countless small moments of rebuilding trust. "Hard to believe it all started with this," Jimmy said, touching the jacket's worn collar. The leather had aged beautifully, carrying the dignity of its journey. "Sometimes I think about that night, how close I came to giving up. One simple act of kindness changed everything." Lily, who had become the initiative's unofficial artist in residence, unveiled her latest work, a mural painted on the garden wall. It depicted the original security camera image of Noah giving away the jacket, but the figures radiated outward into scenes of hope: veterans teaching kids, families reuniting, communities growing stronger together. The artwork captured perfectly how a single moment could expand into something greater than itself. Diana clinked her glass for attention, her presence drawing all eyes naturally. 2 years ago, a boy gave away a jacket on a cold night. Today, the Davis Compassion Initiative has helped over 2,000 veterans and their families find their way home. But numbers don't tell the whole story. She gestured to the gathered crowd, each person representing a thread in the tapestry their story had woven. "Look around. Every person here is part of this story. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every hand extended in help or acceptance. It all matters." Cherry stepped forward, her eyes bright with happy tears. "We've had so many miracles these past 2 years: our new home, the initiative's success, our family healing. But the greatest miracle is seeing how kindness multiplies. Each person helped becomes someone who helps others." James joined them, standing tall and clear-eyed. "When I left that jacket behind, I thought I was leaving everything good in my life. I never imagined it would become a bridge leading me back home." He turned to Noah, his voice thick with emotion. "Son, you taught me that sometimes our greatest losses can become our greatest gifts." Noah looked around at the gathering, at Jimmy teaching young veterans' children how to play chess, at Lily showing her art portfolio to an admiring group of teenagers, at his parents standing close together, their shadows merging in the fading light. The weight of Jimmy's medal in his pocket reminded him daily of how unexpected life's paths could be. As twilight deepened, candles were lit and stories were shared. Veterans spoke of how the initiative had helped them find purpose again. Students described how mentoring had changed their perspective on service and sacrifice. Family members talked about bridges being rebuilt and trust restored. Later, as the party wound down, Noah found a quiet moment with Jimmy by the garden gate. The old veteran's eyes were distant, remembering. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Jimmy said softly. "All the jackets out there, all the chances to help someone, all the moments when a small kindness could change everything." Noah nodded, understanding. The initiative had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. but its heart remained simple, the belief that every person deserves warmth, dignity, and a chance to begin again. Cherry joined them, carrying a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "We wanted you to have this, Jimmy," she said, handing him the gift. Inside was a framed photograph of Jimmy with his first group of veteran mentees, all wearing leather jackets donated by supporters who had heard their story. "The jacket you gave me," Jimmy said to Noah. "It wasn't just about staying warm. It was about being seen, being valued. Now we get to pass that feeling on to others." As the last guests departed, the Davis family stood together in their backyard, surrounded by the remnants of celebration. The twinkling lights reflected in their eyes like stars, and the evening air carried the scent of hope. Noah thought about the young man he'd been 2 years ago, shivering in the cold after giving away his father's jacket. He couldn't have known then how that choice would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond his own. But maybe that was the real miracle, not knowing where kindness might lead but choosing it anyway. The jacket that had once symbolized loss now represented something far greater, the endless possibilities that arise when we open our hearts to others. Its warmth had multiplied, wrapping around not just one person on a cold night, but thousands of lives touched by the power of compassion. And somewhere in Seattle, on any given night, another person might be facing the same choice: to hold on or to give, to turn away or to help. Thanks to the Davis Compassion Initiative, they would know that no act of kindness was ever too small to make a difference. The autumn wind swept through the Stanford University campus, carrying with it the scent of possibility. Noah Davis, now a freshman, studying social innovation and public policy, walked through the historic quadrangle where red and gold leaves danced around his feet. His backpack held textbooks on nonprofit management and social psychology, tools for understanding how to expand the initiative's impact even further. The campus coffee shop had become his favorite studying spot, its worn leather chairs and exposed brick walls reminiscent of the first initiative center in Seattle. Today, he was meeting with a group of fellow students who had started a campus chapter of the Davis Compassion Initiative, focusing on supporting student veterans and their families. "Noah," called out Sarah Chen, the chapter's enthusiastic president. She waved from a corner table where several other students had gathered. Their laptops displayed the initiative's familiar logo, the jacket silhouette that had become a symbol of hope across the country. "We just got the numbers from last month's mentorship drive," Sarah announced as Noah sat down. 30 new student volunteers signed up to work with veteran families. And get this, 3 of them are children of veterans who received help from initiative centers in other cities. Noah smiled, thinking about how the ripples kept spreading. The initiative had grown beyond anything they could have imagined that first night. What had started with one jacket now encompassed 75 centers across the country, each one adapting the core model to serve their local community's unique needs. His phone buzzed with a text from Cherry, a photo of Lily proudly holding up her latest art piece. At 11, she had become the youngest artist to have work permanently displayed in VA hospitals nationwide. Her series, titled The Warmth of Courage, depicted veterans and their families in moments of connection and healing. Another message followed, this one from James. Noah's father had just finished leading a training session for new PTSD counselors at the initiative's expanded mental health program. The photo showed him standing with a group of veterans, their faces reflecting the kind of understanding that could only come from shared experience. "Hey everyone," Noah called the group's attention. "I want to share something with you." He pulled up a video on his laptop, footage from the latest initiative center opening in Houston. Jimmy Reynolds stood at the podium, still wearing the jacket that had started it all, its leather developing a rich patina that seemed to hold all the stories it had witnessed. 2 years ago, Jimmy's voice came through clear and strong. A teenager gave me more than a jacket. He gave me dignity, hope, and a chance to rebuild my life. Today, we're not just opening another building. We're creating another space where kindness can multiply. The students watched intently as the video showed the center's innovative features: a state-of-the-art job training facility, family counseling spaces designed with trauma-informed principles, and a youth center where veterans could mentor local students. But what caught everyone's attention was the wall of jackets in the lobby. "The jacket library," Noah explained. "Anyone who needs one can take one, and anyone who wants to help can leave one. Each jacket has a tag with the donor's story of kindness received or given. It's becoming a living history of how compassion connects us all." Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's what we need here. We could start collecting jackets for the winter quarter, maybe partner with the Campus Veterans Association." The planning session that followed was interrupted by another call: Diana Reynolds, her face appearing on Noah's screen looking both professional and excited. "Noah, we just got the final approval. The initiative's model is being adopted by the VA as a national standard for veteran care. They want to implement our mentorship program in every major city." The news spread quickly through the group, leading to spontaneous celebration. But Noah's thoughts drifted back to that cold Seattle night, to the moment of choice that had started everything. He remembered the weight of his father's jacket in his hands, the uncertainty, the simple decision to help another person. Later that evening, Noah walked back to his dorm under a sky painted with sunset colors. His phone held dozens of congratulatory messages, including one from Mr. Patterson that made him smile. "From one jacket to a movement. Proof that kindness is the most powerful force for change." In his room, Noah opened his desk drawer and took out the small piece of the original jacket's lining that Jimmy had given him. The leather was soft with age, carrying memories of loss and redemption, endings and beginnings. He pinned it to his bulletin board beside photos of initiative celebrations, family gatherings, and veterans whose lives had been transformed. A new message popped up on his laptop, Cherry sending him the latest initiative statistics. Over 5,000 veterans housed, 10,000 family members supported, countless lives touched by the expanding circles of compassion. But it was the personal stories that moved him most. The veteran who became a teacher after receiving mentorship, the family reunited after years of separation, the child who found hope in art therapy. Noah thought about everything that had grown from that single act of kindness, not just the initiatives, programs, and buildings, but the restored relationships, the healed hearts, the renewed sense of purpose in so many lives. The jacket that had once represented his father's absence had become a symbol of presence, of the connections that make us human. As night fell over the campus, Noah began writing in his journal, documenting another day in the ongoing story of the initiative. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help, new chances to prove that kindness could change the world. But for now, he sat with the quiet knowledge that sometimes the smallest choices could lead to the biggest changes, and that love, like a well-worn jacket, only grew warmer when shared. 5 years had passed since that fateful winter night in Seattle. The Davis Compassion Initiative was celebrating its anniversary with a grand ceremony at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Thousands gathered under a crisp December sky, their breath visible in the cold air, a fitting reminder of where it all began. The original jacket, now a national symbol of compassion and hope, had its own special pavilion. Climate-controlled and carefully preserved, it sat beneath soft lighting that highlighted every well-worn crease and loving repair. But it wasn't just a museum piece. Every day, veterans and their families came to touch the glass, to share stories, to find inspiration in its simple message. That kindness has the power to transform lives. Noah, now 21 and about to graduate from Stanford with honors, stood at the podium. His height and bearing matched his father's now, but his eyes still held that same compassion that had driven him to give away the jacket on a cold Seattle night. Behind him sat rows of distinguished guests, politicians, military leaders, philanthropists. But his gaze sought out the faces that meant the most. There was Cherry, who had revolutionized veteran healthcare through the initiative's medical program, her work now being studied in nursing schools nationwide. Beside her sat Lily, 13 now and already an acclaimed artist whose works hung in veterans centers across the country. James, fully recovered and leading the initiative's PTSD support network, sat holding Cherry's hand, their reconciliation a testament to love's patience and persistence. Jimmy Reynolds, still wearing a leather jacket, though not the original, sat in the front row with Diana. Their father-daughter relationship had become a model for the initiative's family reconciliation program. The Reynolds Foundation had grown alongside the initiative, their partnership touching countless lives. 5 years ago, Noah began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. I stood in the cold and made a choice. I didn't know then that giving away my father's jacket would change not just my life, but the lives of so many others. Today, the initiative has helped over 20,000 veterans and their families. We've opened 200 centers across all 50 states. But numbers don't tell the real story. He gestured to the massive screen behind him, where images began to play. A veteran teaching guitar to inner-city kids. A family embracing after years apart. A group of former soldiers working together to build homes for others in need. Each image told a story of healing, of connection, of hope restored. Noah continued, "The jacket that started our journey belonged to my father. He left it behind when PTSD drove him away. When I gave it to Jimmy Reynolds that night, I thought I was losing my last connection to my dad. Instead, that single act of kindness brought him back to us and showed us all that sometimes the things we think we're losing are actually leading us to something greater." Diana took the stage next, her corporate polish now tempered by years of working directly with veteran families. Today, we're announcing the initiative's next phase. Thanks to international partnerships, we're expanding globally. The first overseas centers will open next year in London, Tokyo, and Berlin. The Jacket Scholarship Program has already helped 500 veterans' children attend college. Today, we're doubling that commitment. The announcement drew thunderous applause, but the real power of the moment lay in the quiet tears and proud smiles of those who understood the deeper meaning. This wasn't just about buildings or programs or scholarships. It was about the ripple effect of compassion, how one small act could multiply beyond imagination. After the ceremony, the Davis family gathered in a quiet corner of the pavilion. Cherry wrapped her arms around Noah, whispering, "Your father's jacket kept one person warm that night. Now it warms thousands of hearts." James nodded, his eyes misty. "I left that jacket thinking I had nothing else to give. I never imagined it would give me back everything I thought I'd lost." Lily, who had been studying the jacket's display, turned to her family. "Look," she said softly, pointing to where the evening light caught the leather just so. "It's like it's glowing." And it was. The jacket seemed to radiate warmth, not from the careful lighting or the climate-controlled case, but from within, as if all the stories it had inspired, all the lives it had touched, all the hope it had kindled, had somehow seeped into its very fibers. As the sun set over the National Mall, casting long shadows across the monuments to courage and sacrifice, Noah thought about the journey that had brought them here. The jacket, that had once symbolized loss, had become a beacon of hope, its warmth multiplied in countless acts of kindness across the globe. Jimmy approached Noah, holding something in his hands, a small, wrapped package. Inside was a new leather jacket, its style reminiscent of the original but uniquely its own. "For the next chapter," Jimmy said simply. Noah slipped it on, feeling the weight of legacy and promise. The jacket fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Around him, his family gathered close, not just those related by blood, but the larger family that had grown from one act of kindness on a cold Seattle night. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, like distant lights guiding countless others home. The jacket that had started their story had become more than a symbol. It was a reminder that in every moment, we have the choice to hold on or to give, to turn away or to help, to let our losses define us or to transform them into gifts that keep on giving. And somewhere, on any given night, someone might be facing that same choice, to keep walking or to stop, to stay warm or to share warmth, to play it safe or to take a chance on kindness. Thanks to the Davis Compassion Initiative, They would know that no act of kindness was ever too small to change the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.